Hello. That was a weird little bit of a hiccup to start things off. Haven't seen that happen before. What's going on here? Oh, all right. There's just some kind of weird little hiccup to start things off. Peculiar. All right. Well, greetings and salutations, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome once again to the Storyteller's Corner. I'm your host, Joshua T. Calkins-Treworgy, also known as Byron of Sidious, and this is Break Time Storytime 25. Tonight we're going to be continuing with the presentation of an Amelia City Story, The Pen is Not Mightier. And if you are reading the description on tonight's Break Time stream, you will notice that there's also a little bit of another promotional announcement that if you are looking to find some more macabre-minded material, especially for the upcoming Halloween holiday, then I would encourage you to head on over to Substack.com tomorrow and locate Montag Publishing House. Montag will be presenting the serialized publication of my forthcoming novel, Five and Dime, wherein young Tyler Evans will discover what exactly awaits if you wind up going the wrong way after you pass. Written in the tradition of the great poet Dante Alighieri and the novelist Wayne Barlow, my perception of what the afterlife in hell might be like. Anyhow, let us proceed with tonight's presentation. We pick up where we last left off with part 3 of The Pen is Not Mightier. There's nothing there, Bush said softly, draping one arm over her shoulders. Carla hated feeling like she was lapsing into a gender stereotype, so she lithely slipped up onto her feet from the recliner and paced around the room. When she'd woken up, she panicked, calling the detective on his personal cell phone and demanding that he get over to her apartment. He had shown up in record time, to his credit, but no sooner had she let him in than she began babbling at him about a man in her apartment and some kind of graffiti threat scrawled on her bathroom mirror. When he'd opened the bathroom door, though, Detective Bush had found no such imagery, and he found no sign of a break-in anywhere in her home. Carla could hardly credit that the claw mark insignia was gone, but he had shown her that the mirror was, in fact, completely clean. I know that. I saw that, she replied after half a minute of pacing. I don't know how to explain it, Steve. That creep was here. I know he was. I saw him one other time when I was leaving work the day that I put out that initial feeler story. The detective quirked an eyebrow up at her. You never mentioned that before. I didn't think it was important, she said with a flap of one hand. But this might be the same guy. I mean, some journalists, they get stalkers, but those are usually people who are in print or on the television. I'm just a glorified blogger, really. She stopped and sat on the floor, slumped forward with her forehead on her palms. What could this guy want with me? Steve shrugged and stood up. Listen, you have my number, but I can't always be around. Carla, you need to get a permit, he said. And you know what I mean. She nodded, resigned to the notion. Revolver, right? If you need more than 6 bullets as a civilian in this city, you're in more trouble than a gun can solve, Bush replied. That's why my old man carried one from day one to the day he retired. Plus, you never have to worry about it jamming on you. Carla got to her feet and gave him a sudden hug. Whoa, Car, take it easy, he said, hesitating before returning the embrace. I'm sorry, she said, pulling away from him with a sniffle. I'm still freaked out. Sarge, how do you do, sir? Sarge says, fuck, kept checking, then blinked, and you're live. Yes, indeed, Sarge. There was a little bit of a hiccup in the beginning, but we are live. It's understandable you're still freaked out, he said. You still have that pepper spray? Carla nodded. All right. Keep it close and aim for the eyes and upper chest. Even if you don't hit him in the eyes, the guy can't avoid fumes on his shirt or coat or whatever he's wearing. Carla thanked him again and saw him out of the apartment, locking both the deadbolt and the chain behind him. With Stephen gone, she began to feel a little more like herself again. She'd had some kind of episode, she decided. Some paranoid delusion brought on by sniffing around too many weird stories in the city. She headed back to her bedroom and slipped under the covers, falling into a much easier sleep. Stephen stopped with one foot on the bottom step of the concrete stairs leading up the front of his building, feeling a little like a cartoon character in a 60s MGM presentation, his body wobbling as he bent his upper body and craned his neck to look at the side of the steps. It was an hour before dawn, but in the gauzy pre-day light, he could see the exact symbol that Carla had described to him, spray-painted on the bricks siding the steps. Huh. Small world, he muttered to himself, heading up into the building. His was a more modern structure than Carla's, with no real lobby to speak of, every inch made into living space for maximum occupancy. The front room was a mailroom and elevator car, sided by a stairwell through a side door. Lacking in charm at first glance, it was nonetheless a decent place, with modest 2- and 3-bedroom apartments throughout. Steve stepped into the elevator and hit 3, riding up in wondrous silence. He'd been off duty for half an hour when Carla called, hysterical about someone in her apartment. He had tried to tell her to call 911, but she had demanded that he come over right then, and so he had. It had turned out to be nothing but paranoia, yet, given the kind of strangeness that Amelia City tended to breed, he wasn't surprised that she had finally succumbed to a delusional moment. As far as he was concerned, anyone living in all of Amelia County who didn't have at least one such incident every few years, well, they were the odd ones out. The elevator thumped to a stop on his floor, and as he stepped out into the hallway, he shivered, an unusual chill hanging in the air. He took out his keys and headed down 2 doors from the elevator, humming to himself as he cycled through them. He landed on the right one, unlocked the door, and pushed it open. What he saw when he opened that door made him realize that perhaps Carla wasn't the only one suffering from too much weird. The lights in his kitchen, where the door opened upon, were on, though he had left them off. The hallway off to the left side was also lit up, his television turned on but muted, and his windows open, the curtains fluttering. His sidearm was drawn, knee thumping the floor hard in the blink of an eye as he visually swept for any intruder in a shooter's crouch. Keeping low, gun held out at the ready, he moved slowly in and to his right, sweeping the gun to the left, toward the hallway that led to his bedroom at an angle, his bedroom, bathroom, and workroom. Down at the very end, silhouetted in his bedroom doorway, by the lone lamp he kept on his bedside, out of view of the door, stood a tall, slender figure in a long, dark duster and wide-brimmed traveler's hat. The lighting selection this weirdo had set up was strangely effective, keeping him somehow concealed, despite the presence of illumination. "Hands where I can see them," Steve snapped at the figure, cocking the hammer on his revolver. The other man's hands came out and forward, palms up, slowly, like a shambling zombie. "This is not an attack, detective," the intruder said in a gruff, gravelly drawl. Stephen could see the man wore cowboy boots, replete with spurs, faded blue jeans, and the sort of belt worn by an old Western gunfighter. Where a Sergio Leone character would be wearing a six-shooter, though, this man had sheathed a long knife and a clip-on compass. I am here to warn you. Put your hands on the back of your head and step forward where I can fully see you, Steve said curtly, holding his position. Do it now. Oh, that's not going to happen, Johnny Law, the man said with genuine mirth in his voice. His hands dropped to his sides, and as his left hand slid up toward the knife handle, Steve opened fire, squeezing off 2 rounds back to back. He saw the bullets hit, saw the intruder flinch back, but other than a small impact flinch, the intruder showed no signs of effect. 38 caliber. That's amusing, the cowboy said, drawing out his knife, a wicked thing of faintly bluish metal. Steve fired again, but even as he pulled the trigger, he saw a flash of steel and heard 2 impacts. He cut the bullet in half, he thought. That's impossible. That's cartoon shit. Steve had only 3 more rounds in the cylinder, and if this cretin had a vest, as he now suspected, it would take a head or extremity shot to bring him to heel. Play along, Steve. Get him to come forward and get a clean shot. You say you're here to warn me? Steve said, still holding his crouched position. Even if he couldn't take this guy down himself, someone else in the building surely had heard the gunshots and had called for a police response. Warn me about what? About greed, detective, the cowboy said. Greed comes in many forms, some more vulgar than others. You picked up on that, yeah? On what? On how I pick 'em, the man replied. Steve's guts squirmed. This cretin in his home was the serial killer that he was after. Their avarice, in all cases, goes above and beyond. And all for what? Money, he said slowly, disdain dripping from his voice like syrup. It is a low thing to aspire to, in my estimation. Then again, I have very little use for such things, he said with a shrug. Now, a man like you, he rasped, cocking his wrist up slightly, pointing at Detective Bush with the tip of his cerulean glowing blade. You have a certain greed about you as well. You crave the glory of a spotlight arrest, something that will earn you commendations, perhaps a medal of some sort. Frontline story in the day's paper. But your greed is couched in something almost noble, a willingness to self-sacrifice for the greater good, said the cowboy, twirling his knife about and sliding it back into its sheath in one slick motion. That is why you get a warning. Do not interfere with me or my task. The master will tolerate your continued existence upon this mortal coil. But should you become trouble in my road, I shall clear you out like so much detritus from my boots. Do you understand me? Steve felt his throat and chest tightening up, but he managed to say, I understand, but it's my job to stop people like you. The cowboy lowered his head an inch and shook it slightly, letting out a tired sigh. Well, you can try. Right now. No hard feelings, said the cowboy. After all, I've intruded upon your home, but you've already tried to shoot me 3 times, Chief. You really think 3 more will help you any? Bush lowered his gun, holding it at his side in case the cretin came any closer. Keep clear of me, big man, and you'll soon enough be rid of my work. for the time being. Try to get the drop on me, though, and I will gut you like a pig." The narrow cowboy turned away, his spurs clacking and clanging loudly on the floor as he started away. Bush couldn't let him just leave without learning something more about what was going on. "Who are you?" the detective asked softly, his hand still tightly gripping the handle of his weapon. The cowboy stopped, turning his head to speak side-mouth over his shoulder. "I am the stranger named Roderick. He of the blade," the stranger said. "One thing more, detective. Say nothing of our little palaver here to the reporter woman. Slip up, and you both get added to my to-do list." Bush just nodded, watching as the stranger sauntered away, the lights in the apartment flickering madly as he slipped into the bathroom. A minute later, as the electronics in the apartment came back into normal operation, Steve rushed the bathroom and found it utterly empty. Whatever else he was, this weirdo calling himself a stranger was one hell of an escape artist. One week and 3 more victims later, Carla realized with a start that she had discovered a precise pattern to the victim selection. She went over the data several times at the office in order to convince herself, and in each case, her end result came to the same conclusion. "You're not so clever after all," she thought. "Well, okay, you are, but now I know what you're up to." She had a choice to make now, sitting in her tiny cubicle, her computer screen glowing at her like a droning professor who doesn't care anymore if his students are actually listening. She could either contact Steve and tell him what she had figured out, letting the authorities deal with the maniac, or she could watch the person she believed was next on the madman's hit list to see if she was right. The answer came quickly to her. Journalistic pride be damned. She couldn't risk letting someone die when she could prevent it just to satisfy her own curiosity. She grabbed her phone and called Detective Bush, got sent to his voicemail, and left him a detailed message about the serial killer's next probable target, according to her hypothesis. When she hung up, Carla checked in with her boss to head home, descending to the parking garage. As she stepped off of the elevator, she paused, remembering the scare that she'd had not long before with the gangly man in the shadows. Keeping that in mind, she drew out her pepper spray and kept it at the ready as she hurried toward her car. She got to her vehicle without incident, but when she unlocked the door and got in, she froze at the sight of a folded piece of paper on her passenger seat. "That's not mine," she thought. Carla locked the doors and reached over gingerly, snatching up the paper. She opened it and took in what it read in a fine, stylized cursive. "I will tell you what you would know if you can find me. Signed, Roderick." Carla reached into her purse, pulling out the small pocket notebook that she'd been keeping notes in. She brought up her phone's maps application, punched in the address that she had written down, and started the car. As the building's underground parking door slid shut behind her vehicle, the stranger named Roderick stepped out of his place of concealment. His head was throbbing with a pain that he could not readily identify the source of, though he had suspicions. He was acting on his own right now, beyond the scope of his given task. If the master, Lord Quoth, knew what he was up to, the raven-headed freak would be wroth with fury. So let him be angry, the stranger thought with a sneer. What will he do to me? I still serve. What matter if I serve myself as well from time to time? The stranger named Roderick slipped back into the shadows once again, rubbing at his temples. And that is where we will leave off for tonight. This has been the third part of The Pen is Not Mightier, an Amelia City story, written and presented by yours truly. And I didn't mention it at the top of the presentation, but as you can tell, once again, I'm in the van at work. I'm in my vehicle. There is a lot of functions going on in the event center, which the back kind of loading area and the trash bin are kind of right about 10 feet away from that bench that I usually sit at when I'm doing the break time story time. And there were going to be, staff coming in and out constantly. So I figured, you know what? It's just going to be easier to go to the van and to do the broadcast. Probably going to be doing most of my break time story times in the van from here on out, at least for a little while. Thank you, Sarge. Sarge says that he's enjoying these installments, these tellings. I appreciate that. For most of my time as a storyteller, I have been a fantasy storyteller first and a horror storyteller second. But this being October, being the spooky season, I do tend to focus more on the delightfully deranged and marvelously macabre of Amelia City. And as my time has gone on, I have become much more fond of writing horror and writing supernatural suspense and psychological horror as opposed to straight fantasy. But I still love fantasy. Lucian Lucian E. Laveris, thank you. Welcome once again. It was good to see you in Brother Cortex's show this morning. He says, I would have more thought you moved for the cold weather moving in. Great minds think alike. Yes. So, Sarge, it's a rolling weatherproof studio. Kind of. Kind of. Yeah, with the cold weather creeping in. This is southern Minnesota. So you know that the worst of it's going to hit any day now. It's coming. There's no avoiding it. But since I park kind of the back end of the lot at work, it's kind of a quick and easy walk out to my vehicle. So it makes it easy to get out here within a couple of minutes of my break starting, so I can get right to business and start the show. And Lucian, it was great to see you in the show with Brother Cortex this morning for our weekly culling of the nerd. I'm really sorry that when you popped in at that moment, I was flipping off the camera. It was it's just bad timing, brother. I was in the middle of a screed, and trust me, the whole show this morning with Brother Cortex was just largely it was a rage dump. We just both of us had to get that shit out of our systems. It's it's gotten to the point where for so many of the franchises and intellectual properties that he and I both have been fans of for so long, we see them just corrupting everything that we loved growing up. 92 today in Arizona, says Sarge. It's fucking sweater weather for you. Thank you, Lucian. He says, no worries. It was funny. Sweater weather. 92 should not be sweater weather in Arizona. Although, Katie Hobbs is your governor, I can understand there might be some additional heat because that woman is from the seventh ring of hell. Well, actually, not the seventh. Well, that makes sense with the. No, I'm thinking there are 9 levels of hell. So it'd actually be the seventh, or is it the 9th ring of hell? 7th ring of hell? I'm trying to remember. I think it would be the 9th ring of hell. is the frozen waste in Alighieri's Infernus. But it's reserved for traitors and suicides. And that would, you would want sweater weather down there if you were in the frozen waste. And I like making that allusion given the story that is going to start its presentation beginning tomorrow over on Montag Publishing on Substack. I've been looking forward to, I've been trying to find the proper home for Five and Dime for a long time, a couple of years. And I have spent the interim tightening up that novel and restructuring certain scenes, certain chapters, rearranging a few things in order to make certain that it is the ideal story as I want to tell it, or as I want it told. Because I first wrote the story, the initial draft, like a decade ago. And because the person I was initially working with try and create an animated independent series out of it, we just broke contact. I continued writing that story, and it's finally going to be done. Oh, there you go, Lucian. You're in Scotland, where sweaters are part of a lass's pulling gear. Well, Lucian, I did not know that you were in Scotland. But yeah, Scotland, Ireland, England, you always need a sweater available at the ready, because you don't get the greatest amount of warmth in those countries. Sarge says, real weather. Right, it is. It is indeed there. But I've been thinking too, when it comes to the break time story time, I am considering possibly taking most of the month of December off of doing the break time story time. I know I just got started doing this as a regular thing. This is break time story time 25. I have not been at it terribly long, but I do want to give myself an opportunity to kind of use some of the time on my breaks at work to do some reading or do some writing, work on some projects. Spinning several plates because I'm currently in the process of writing a couple more short stories for the Free Spirits line of short stories for Montag Publishing and Liberty Magazine, as well as doing an outline, a draft up, or a drop list scene by scene extended outline for another or a new Temilarian tale. I haven't done a Temilarian tale in a few years. The most recent one I did was Family Lives, which was the third story for a company of sort of inexplicable heroes or members of the Freelancers Guild of Temilaria. Yeah, I haven't done a solid standalone Temilarian tale in a while. I've been reproducing or republishing in serialized fashion on Substack A Hunter and His Prey, which was the technically the third fifth age Temilarian tale. I've been mostly doing fourth age Temilarian tales for the last 7 or 8 years. And the last 3 were all featuring the character of Digby Nerrick, a Volpessan rogue, foxman. Not quite a lycanthrope, yet some benefits of being one of the lycanthrope races. But it's his story along with Memnoch Alkesh, a mage woman who is also deeply ingrained and partnered with Digby as one of his typical teammates whenever They accept contracts for the guild. Sirach Delpa, a battle priest dwarf, and Biff the barbarian. Yes, his name is Biff. He is a 19-year-old human barbarian with effectively the intellectual capacity of a 7-year-old. Biff's response to most challenges is, "Can I break it?" But having that childlike mentality. He means well. He's just a big klutz whose primary skill set is bashing and hacking things to pieces. But really quick, coming up on the end of my break time here, I'm going to have to get ready to head back in, get back to it. I will say, though, it's encouraging to have seen. It's been encouraging tonight to see the audience number tick up all the way towards 12, which is unusual for me on really any stream that I do. So that's mildly encouraging. But anywho, do any of you folks have any last minute questions before I head out and get back to work for the evening? No Back to the Future reference there? How do you mean? With Biff? With Biff. No. Biff the Barbarian was not a reference to Back to the Future. Biff the Barbarian was actually, he and Digby both were initially characters that I created for use in conversations that I had with a handful of colleagues and acquaintances in a Dungeons and Dragons enthusiasts group that I was a member of for a long time on Facebook, where people would try to come up with these amusing little scenarios of, well, what would you do if you were a DM or a GM, or if you were a player character in this situation or that situation. And rather than coming up with a direct response, or use an example from the time over the years where I was a GM or a player at a table, I would write these short little scenes and scenarios that were just brand new, predicated upon these inquiries. And two of the characters I used, the invented characters for these responses I would jot down, were Digby, the Velpesson, the Foxman rogue, and Biff McLargehuge, the barbarian. But eventually I decided, I'm going to make an actual story for these guys. And I ultimately ended up doing just that and ended up writing 3 of them. Dear Sarge asks, how was the birthday party? The birthday party went swimmingly, brother. Thank you for asking. My kiddo, it wasn't a huge number of people who showed up, but two of her 3 best friends made it. The third one, unfortunately, had soccer practice, but that's okay. It was a nice little setup at the arcade and bowling alley. Everybody had a good time. Nobody got sick from any food or anything. And we came in under budget. So what more can you ask for? Nobody got into any kind of arguments or fights over anything, which for my sons, is actually rather miraculous. They didn't get into any fights, but there was so much stuff to do that they really didn't have much of a chance to butt heads. And then at one point, they both roped me into joining in and being a third player in a big new Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles arcade beat 'em up game that they have there. It was pretty fun. It was a minor miracle, Lucian. Because my sons like pounding on each other at home, in public, over at the in-laws, doesn't matter where we're at. They tend to go ham on each other. So this was great. No, I never. Sarge, Dear Sarge says, bet you were a great DM with your imagination. Probably never bought a module, all original. One moment. I am being called to get to something when I get back in, so But I will say this really quick before I go. Sarge, never bought a module. I always homebrewed. I used my own short story creations as adventure settings and story settings. And the longest campaign that my players from high school ever got through with me was the foundational premise for the very first novel I had commercially published, which was Freedom of the Fire. The first novel was Damnation of the Realm, and the second novel was entitled The Dread Knight's Redemption. I created Temeraria initially as a homebrew Dungeons and Dragons environment. We didn't even use the Dungeons and Dragons game system. We used something that my brother Newton had developed at college called TAPS, the alternate persona system, which used percentages rather than a D20. And it was a labor of love. And I so enjoyed running campaigns in that homebrewed world. I wanted to carry that on as I became a standalone author. That's where Temeraria comes from. It comes from tabletop role-playing games that I enjoyed as a kid and as a teenager. That hobby is still with me. That's why I hate what Wizards of the Coast has tried to do to the hobby. But anyway, I'm running out of the mouth. I got to get back into work. Folks, thank you for tuning in once again and for spending your time with me. I know that any given night you have options for entertainment, and I appreciate that you chose to spend some of that time here with me. I don't want you to think that I would take that for granted. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for listening. I ask that you take care of yourselves, and as always, folks, keep reading.